The politics you're watching right now has happened already before, and not just once, but over 2,000 years, over and over again. And almost every time, at the heart of it, was just one simple thing: the price of land. Hi, my name's Henry. I'm a former wealth manager and economist, now based here in Switzerland. Let's start with Rome. Over the course of centuries, a large number of the wealthy nobility were acquiring land that used to belong to the state. They were buying it up, occupying it, and foreclosing on the small farmers who were resident there. They then rolled up these land acquisitions into huge estates to be worked by slaves. The Romans had a name for this: latifundia. The small farmers who used to work it, once being pushed off, were forced into the cities and left with nothing. Two brothers, the Gracchi, tried to break these latifundia up and return ownership to the Roman people. Both of them were very swiftly killed for trying to do so. Historians date the slow death of the Roman Empire to around this period. The land concentrated first, and then the violence happened. 1879, Ireland, with rents that nobody could pay. There were mass evictions, and the country didn't take that lightly. They organized themselves against the landlords and actually gave us a new word in English, named after one of the landlords. It was called boycott. A different century, a different people, a different politics, but the land still determined the politics. You also see this in Australia in the 1880s. They had a massive land boom around the city of Melbourne. It was so big they called it Marvellous Melbourne. Then it collapsed, and it took the banks with it. Out of the wreckage came a number of strikes, and also the basis for the Australian Labour Party. A similar pattern, but notice the timing this time. The politics came after the crash. Throughout history, this seems to repeat itself relatively frequently, where land comes up as a political question that sparks a more extremist version of politics. Now, for the post-crash case, like Melbourne, three economists took a look into this, and they were Funk, Trebesh, and Skularik. They went through the history of 20 nations politically, all the way back to 1870. They looked at over 800 elections. Their finding was pretty interesting. After a financial crash, the votes for the far-right parties increased by over a third. They observed that not in just normal recessions, but specifically in financial crashes. But the crash is the easy version. Here's the harder claim, the one that almost no one ever makes. The damage doesn't wait for the crash. It's already starting on the way up. While prices are still climbing and while the economy looks like it's still going up, the group of people locked out of ever possibly owning is growing. The politics starts breaking at that point, not after the crash. And the latest studies show something much more interesting. Ansel and colleagues looked at Denmark. When house prices fall on people who own homes, they seem to swing to the populist right. A Max Planck study in Germany looked at what happens when the rents rise. When the rents rise in urban areas, the people who don't own property tend to swing to the populist left, while the people in the left-behind towns outside of the major urban centres swing to the right. So it's not just one direction. The housing situation sorts people into two groups who seem to completely hate each other. Now, the swing to the left and the swing to the right is easy when you think about the framing and who they seem to blame for the issues at hand. One side of this political populism looks down at newcomers, at outsiders, at differences. The other side, on the left, looks at the system. They look up. Both of them are looking for some reason, some description, some information on what has happened to them, what's happened to the cost of their housing, what's happened to their standard of living. For the right, the misdiagnosis is usually to look for a villain, the idea that someone has done this to you, that some commingled factor has caused this issue. It's relatively simplistic, but it works psychologically. For you to have lost something, you must interpret that someone has taken it from you. The extreme left, on the other hand, also has a relatively simplistic view, yet again from the idea that something was withdrawn, some opportunity was taken. The left's frame here is usually to describe a system where something is extractive, that it's been removed from you, that opportunity has been taken, that some people are personally benefiting from it. Again, looking for a strong villain character. Neither the left or the right are particularly wrong about being angry about their circumstances, but both, I believe, are wrong about the cause. Now, when you relate this theory back to today, the data that we see, the countries that are most affected by the Rentier black hole, that would be Britain, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea. Each one of them is currently experiencing a housing boom. Right at the same time, its politics is bifurcating into quite extreme right and quite extreme left. South Korea is one of the more extreme examples here. A fraction of 1% of its population owns more than half of its apartment wealth. It has the lowest birth rate on the planet. And coincidentally, it's a country that just recently declared martial law during an attempted political coup d'etat. But when you look underneath it, the thing that's boiling through seems to be their housing market. Now, while this might be a simplistic view, housing and the cost of housing has a huge effect on the remainder of the economy, as we've covered in the rest of this series, and a lot of knock-on effects. But a really interesting example to look at here for the political effects of property would be Japan. In the early 90s, a huge bubble in the valuation of Japanese shares and companies burst. And for 30 years since that bubble burst, Japanese property did nothing. The prices have been relatively flat. A house was simply a place to live, not an investment. And during that period, Japanese politics has been reliably boring. But in the last 3 years, Japan has experienced a real estate boom, in particular in Tokyo. The average new apartment in Tokyo just crossed 130 million yen. That's about $850,000 today. The prices have risen by 18% in a single year. This is a brand new record for price rises for the third year in a row. And when you look at the purchases in some of the most desirable districts, between 20 and 40% of those apartment purchases were coming from foreign buyers. And then, right on cue, Japanese politics has decided to stop being boring. They now have their first serious nationalist party, running on the slogan, Japanese First. It's the same country, with the same culture, and the only factor that seems to have changed is the cost of housing. So when people talk to you about politics, globally, going insane, and they start talking about how it's culture, or the internet, or the other side who you happen to dislike, I'd keep one thing in mind. This exact same process seems to have happened for the last 2,000 years, and right now it seems to be following a perfect schedule. It seems to uniquely track one variable. It looks like a culture war, but it behaves like a price. Try and think of a time it didn't.